We're starting off with F tier, unwatchable trash. Epic movie. This is probably the single worst fantasy movie I've ever seen. It's one of those parody spoof movies written by Aaron Seltzer and Jason Friedberg, aka two of the 6 writers of Scary Movie. Which, by the way, allegedly, these two fucking hacks did not actually write the script for Scary Movie. What actually happened, allegedly, is that these guys wrote a completely different script called Scream If You Know What I Did Last Halloween. Meanwhile, the Wayans brothers are the ones who actually wrote the script for Scary Movie. And apparently Miramax wanted to make Scary Movie, but they didn't want to have this other Scream parody come out around the same time. So what they did was they purchased both of the scripts. They bought the Scary Movie script and the Scream If You Know What I Did Last Halloween script. And essentially for the purposes of avoiding any lawsuits, the Writers Guild of America decided that they had to give writing credits to Seltzer and Friedberg, even though they did not actually write the script for Scary Movie. So after that whole situation, these guys went on to make a bunch of other parody movies. There was Date Movie, Epic Movie, Disaster Movie, Beat the Spartans, Vampires Suck, The Starving Games. I mean, these guys just have a whole fucking cinematic universe of awful parody movies. And they always use this cheap marketing tactic, Epic Movie, brought to you by 2 of the 6 writers of Scary Movie. You guys did not fucking write Scary Movie. So anyway, Epic Movie is their spoof of fantasy movies, mainly the Chronicles of Narnia, but also some other stuff like Pirates of the Caribbean, Willy Wonka, and Harry Potter. And as you'd expect, it is complete garbage. Their entire playbook basically amounts to copying and pasting scenes from popular movies, but then adding a bunch of lame, raunchy jokes on top and then calling it parody. And by the way, I am all for parody, but these movies are just an absolute abomination to the concept of parody. I'm pretty sure these movies only exist because these two dudes found an easy money glitch. Step 1, milk the Scary Movie writing credits that you got on a technicality. Step 2, make a bunch of pop culture references and then add in some lowbrow jokes so that you can call it parody and not have to deal with copyright infringement. And then boom, that's it. Now you got a successful Hollywood career. I'm sure they made a quick buck at the box office. Congratulations. But Epic Movie is genuinely the worst fantasy movie I've ever seen, F tier. Oh, and by the way, I'm not the type of person who goes out of my way to watch horrible movies, so if there's any other fantasy movies that belong in F tier, let me know in the comments. C tier, movies that are at least watchable. And that's right, there's no D tier because that's how it was for me in engineering school. If you don't get at least a C, then you fail. Ain't no D tier. Excalibur, and this movie is simultaneously one of the best fantasy movies ever made, but also one of the biggest pieces of shit in the entire genre. I don't even know where to begin. This is genuinely one of the most bizarre movies I've ever seen. First of all, they basically tried to speedrun the entirety of Arthurian legend into one movie. It begins with Arthur's birth, then they've got the Sword and the Stone, they've got Arthur becoming king, they've got the Knights of the Round Table, Lancelot and Guinevere's affair, the Holy Grail, Morgana and Mordred. I mean, that is just way too much stuff to cover in one movie. And okay, I can respect the ambition and the epic scale, but unfortunately the movie just ends up feeling like a giant Wikipedia article rather than an actual story. And you might think that me putting this movie in C tier means I think it's mid, but nah man, in this case, this movie is the exact opposite of mediocre. Almost every single aspect of Excalibur is either A tier amazing or just F tier hilariously bad. It's only in C tier because the extremes average out to the middle. For example, on the positive side, it has one of the coolest dark fantasy aesthetics I've ever seen. One of the best aspects of Excalibur is just admiring the armor and costumes, except for Merlin. Like, what the fuck is that goofy ass helmet he's always wearing? Okay, but aside from Merlin, the costumes and overall production design could not have been executed better. Even if it is a bit anachronistic and historically inaccurate, it all just looks awesome. However, on the negative side, the writing and acting performances in this movie are just painful to watch. Like, the characters in this movie are so stilted and awkward that it feels like you're watching a bunch of extraterrestrial theater kids trying to play Dungeons and Dragons.
Did you free Excalibur from the stone?
Yes. No.
And to make matters worse, it has some of the worst ADR I've ever seen in a movie. Like, there will be times where he'll do a close-up on King Arthur, and he'll just be saying some bullshit while his mouth is closed.
Throw the sword into it.
Okay, I'm being kind of mean to this movie. Yes, it does have a lot of issues, and I was definitely regretting my decision to rent this movie for pretty much the entire first half of the movie. But I will admit, once it got to the second half, I was locked in. Once this movie turns into a psychedelic fever dream, except in a dark fantasy setting, that's when I started to really understand why this is considered as kind of a classic. So I am giving Excalibur a C tier, but it's the best type of C tier. Damsel, and this is that one straight to Netflix movie starring Millie Bobby Brown. I mean, does anybody even remember this movie? This movie is pretty much just the exact opposite of Excalibur, because while Excalibur is either absolutely amazing or just hilariously bad in pretty much every single category, and then it averages out to a C tier, Damsel is just mediocre in every sense. It doesn't even do anything particularly poorly, but there's also nothing great about it either. Really nothing even noteworthy about it at all. I mean, it is watchable, but it's the type of movie that you forget everything about it within a week of watching it. So you know what? I'm actually going to bump Excalibur up to B tier because I will take a heavily flawed but kind of awesome movie like Excalibur over something like Damsel, which is just the true definition of mid. The Hobbit, the entire trilogy. I'm not going to spend too much time harping on these movies because, I mean, that's pretty much just beating a dead horse. It's basically what everyone has already said about these movies. Adapting a 300-page book into a 9-hour movie trilogy was a horrible idea. I mean, as Bilbo would say, they were scraping butter over too much bread. And on top of that, because of the high frame rate and the excessive use of CGI, these movies just look hideous, especially when you compare it to Lord of the Rings. I mean, they're not the worst movies ever, but I have zero desire to ever watch these again. So the entire Hobbit trilogy goes into C tier. All right, now we're moving up into B tier, actually good movies. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. And obviously there's like, 8 different Harry Potter movies, plus there's those Fantastic Beasts movies. I'm not going to cover all of them right now, so I decided to go with Goblet of Fire for 2 reasons. Number 1, because it's just my favorite out of all of them. I'm not saying it's the best one, but it is my favorite. And number 2, because I actually think that this movie best encapsulates the dichotomy of Harry Potter. On the one hand, the production is just absolutely insane. Hogwarts is a truly magical setting, and I think it is one of the best in all of fantasy, just purely in terms of the vibes. I mean, they just really nailed the look and feel of it in these movies. However, on the other hand, these movies are just riddled with so many random goofy moments.
He was that friend! How did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire?
For example, in this movie, they're having a tournament between 3 different schools, and in order to compete in this tournament, you have to be 17 years old. Any younger than that, you're not allowed to compete in the tournament. So Harry Potter, who's 14 years old in this movie, he gets selected because of course he does. He's the main character. So the entire school just goes dead silent when his name gets called. I mean, you could hear a pin drop in the crowd. Then all of a sudden you just hear in the background, "He's a cheat. He's not even 17 yet." I don't know why, but I always just found that reaction so funny. Like, all these kids at Hogwarts are just a bunch of fucking snitches. And there's just a bunch of little moments like that in these movies that are so goofy. Another one is when the Durmstrang school makes their entrance. They're one of the other schools competing in the tournament. And for some reason, these kids just walk in with the edgiest theater kid type of entrance ever. Like, who are these kids? Okay, I got one more, and I promise this is the last one. And this isn't from the Goblet of Fire, but it's probably my favorite moment in the entire series. It's a scene when they're trying to use flue powder to teleport to Diagon Alley. And how it works is you have to say the name of the place you want to teleport to, and then poof, you teleport there. So Mrs. Weasley is like, "Okay, Harry, you have to say Diagon Alley very, very clearly." And then Harry Potter's just like, "Diagonally." It's like, bro, are you fucking stupid? That is the least clearly you could have possibly said that. But yeah, that pretty much sums up the entire Harry Potter franchise. Incredibly well-made blockbuster productions, but just full of so many goofy moments like that. And I'm not even trying to say this as a huge knock against these movies, because that is part of the charm. After the Goblet of Fire, these movies started to get a lot more serious, and I think a lot was lost by doing that. I mean, I do get why they decided to go in that direction, but in my opinion, the first 4 movies are just so much more enjoyable than the last 4 movies. Anyway, Goblet of Fire is B tier, and honestly, so is every other Harry Potter movie. I'm sure there's going to be some people who are mad about that, but B tier is a good rating. I think it's a good movie. Labyrinth, and this is a prime example of 80s fantasy movies being extremely unhinged. And if you haven't seen Labyrinth, I'm not going to spoil anything, but the basic premise of the movie is that there's this girl who is annoyed that she has to babysit her younger brother. So naturally, her go-to move is to make a wish that this kid gets taken by goblins, which that's kind of a fucked up thing to wish upon your baby brother. But anyway, by doing this, she summons David Bowie, aka Jareth the Goblin King. So he captures the baby and then makes her go through this treacherous labyrinth in order to rescue him. And by the way, this is a kid's movie. And yeah, I really wish I would have watched this movie as a kid. I mean, it might have freaked me out a bit, but I feel like I probably would have loved it. Instead, I just watched this movie for the first time about a week ago. And I mean, I can see why it's a classic, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend it's one of my all-time favorite movies. And don't get me wrong, overall, I did enjoy the movie, but after a while, all of these little goblin side characters start to get kind of annoying. This isn't even really a valid criticism. I am fully aware that this is a petty nitpick, but I just kind of got sick of listening to all these little goblin puppets. Like, they kind of reminded me of the unhinged version of Sesame Street characters.
You shut up!
When you're watching this movie, you just have to sit through all these little fuckers incessantly yapping. It was just a little bit too much for me. I'm not trying to ruin your childhood by not giving this movie an A tier, but that was just my experience with the movie. However, I will give credit where it's due. Visually speaking, Labyrinth has aged like a fine wine. It's one of those movies that heavily relies on matte paintings and puppets, and it looks amazing. Okay, sure, while you're watching it, you are very aware that you're watching people on a movie set. It's not like this movie is fooling anybody or making this labyrinth actually look like a real place, but that's actually a huge part of the charm. I think most people would agree that these sorts of practical effects are way better than CGI. I mean, it's a weird-ass movie, but in a good way for the most part, so B tier. Okay, since I'm not trying to dedicate the next 5 years of my life to reviewing every single fantasy movie in existence, there's a lot of pretty good fantasy movies that I'm not going to cover, but I feel like they do at least deserve an honorable mention. Never-Ending Story, The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Dungeons & Dragons, Honor Among Thieves. All three of those are solid B-tier fantasy movies and are definitely worth watching. A-tier, peak cinema. The Princess Bride. And okay, I'm not the type of person to judge someone for not liking certain movies. At least I try not to. Everyone has their own taste. I really don't care if someone disagrees with my opinions. In fact, that's how it should be. But in the case of The Princess Bride, if you don't like this movie, like, then what the fuck is wrong with you? I mean, obviously, I'm just kidding. I could totally understand if someone was like, okay, it's not really for me. I don't think it's that good of a movie. That would be understandable. But if someone just came out of the woodworks and told me, like, I passionately dislike The Princess Bride, I hate that movie, that would be kind of weird. It's just one of those movies that makes you happy, and not even in a forced, overly sentimental way. Like, it just has a really witty script. It has iconic acting performances. It's funny. It's a super wholesome fairy tale. It's perfectly paced. I really don't see how you could not at least somewhat like this movie. Personally, I think it's one of the best fantasy movies, and it's an easy A tier. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. But that's a TV show, not a movie. You can't put that in a movie tier list. Okay, yes, technically it is a TV show, but let's be honest, the show is basically just a movie with 5 intermissions. Do you know how easy it would be to simply just import all 6 episodes into DaVinci Resolve, fully rendered and everything, then just cut out the title cards and end credits, splice it together, maybe cut out a few scenes, then boom, you got a feature-length movie. And I will die on this hill, that is exactly what they should have done. They should have made this into a 150-minute movie, released it in theaters, and then dropped the 200-minute extended edition on HBO. It should have gotten the Lord of the Rings treatment. I'm not even saying that just because the total runtime of the show is about 3.5 hours, about the same length as one Lord of the Rings movie, but even the narrative structure itself works super well as a movie. It's a self-contained story with a beginning, middle, and end. There's no filler, no real reason why this needs to be an episodic format. I mean, the novellas the show is adapted from were basically tailor-made to be movies that you watch in one sitting. But okay, setting that aside, I just love A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms Season 1. I mean, it does have very simple themes, but they are extremely resonant. It's basically just about what it means to be honorable, especially for someone who lives in an extremely brutal and dishonorable society. But the best part is that it presents those themes through an almost airtight, perfectly plotted story. I think the main reason why the plot is so compelling is because George R. R. Martin is so good at actually following through with the consequences of people's actions. So this is just a story about a guy who's trying to enter into a jousting tournament, but then without spoiling anything, things start to happen and then it goes in the natural direction that you would expect as the consequence of people's actions. And it just ends up taking you on this journey that perfectly delivers the themes while also just being incredibly entertaining. I will admit that I'm biased because I love the dunk and egg novellas that this show is based on, but I really think even if you've never seen Game of Thrones and have no familiarity with the Song of Ice and Fire, you could still definitely enjoy A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms Season 1. I mean, I don't think A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is perfect. There are a few actually just bad scenes in the show. For example, probably the worst scene in the entire show is literally the opening scene of episode 1. It also does have an overly long flashback scene at a certain point later in the show, but outside of a few of those kind of bad scenes here and there, 99% of the show is just amazing. I mean, it's basically impossible to watch this show and not become a huge fan of Dunk and Egg. So yeah, Knight of the Seven Kingdoms goes into A tier. Honorable mentions for A tier: The Wizard of Oz, Shrek, Shrek 2, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. All of those are certified classics. S tier: The greatest fantasy movies of all time. Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and I will admit that this is an extremely biased pick. I was obsessed with this movie when I was a little kid. There was even one year for Halloween when I was about 10 years old where I made a homemade Sir Galahad costume, and then when I went out trick-or-treating, my parents were behind me clanking coconuts while I went around the neighborhood doing the iconic horse gallop. So yeah, I was obsessed with this movie. I kind of have to put this into S tier just because this movie holds a special place in my heart. But even if I set my bias aside, I still do think it is actually just one of the greatest comedies ever made. This movie is just amazing scene after amazing scene. For example, you've got the Black Knight scene, you've got the French knights taunting the Knights of the Round Table, you've got the witch being burned at the stake, you've got the politically savvy peasants, and the craziest thing is that all of these bits are timeless. Comedy is one of those things that tends to age poorly over time, except not this movie. All of the jokes still hold up to this day. And on top of that, I honestly think it's the best King Arthur movie. I mean, obviously it's a total farce and it's pretty much making a mockery of King Arthur, but I think that's actually the best way to cover Arthurian legend, because let's be honest, it is kind of ridiculous. So yeah, this movie is basically killing two birds with one stone. You've got one of the greatest comedies ever made and also probably the best King Arthur movie. This is an easy S tier. The Lord of the Rings, and yeah, nobody is even remotely surprised that this is S tier. It's pretty much universally regarded as the greatest fantasy series of all time. I mean, I've already glazed Lord of the Rings several times on my channel. I've already mentioned it many times that Fellowship of the Ring is one of my top 2 favorite movies of all time, along with Mulholland Drive. So, I mean, there really isn't much left to be said about these masterpieces. I mean, I guess these movies do have a few haters. For example, apparently Tolkien's son hated these movies. Miyazaki apparently doesn't like these movies. Plus, there's a lot of die-hard book purists who like to trash on them. But you know what? You can't please everybody. I would say these movies are about as perfect of an adaptation as you could possibly ask for. Like, imagine if the Lord of the Rings adaptation had turned out like fucking Aragon. Like, think of how much of a travesty that would have been. We really did get insanely lucky that probably the greatest book series in the entire fantasy genre also just happened to get pretty much a perfect movie adaptation. Okay, maybe not 100% perfect. There are a few things you can nitpick, like some of the CGI, or maybe the fact that Frodo's character in the movies is not as good of a character as he is in the books. But whatever, man. These movies are still easily the pinnacle of fantasy cinema, and they definitely go into S tier. Alright, those are some of the best and worst fantasy movies. Check out this video right here to see the best and worst villains in cinema history.